At 15, my parents sent me to my grandparents' farm so my golden brother could shine. Years later, I built a life they never saw coming. They returned demanding support, only to realize my wedding didn't. I was 15 years old when my parents called me into the kitchen, sat me down at the table, and basically informed me that I was being shipped out like a broken package nobody felt like dealing with anymore, even if they dressed it up in nicer language. They didn't say it straight, of course. Instead, they leaned on phrases like temporary situation, what's best for the family, and my all-time favorite, you'll get it when you're older, which is funny because I'm older now, and I get it completely. They wanted me out of the house. Ethan, sweetie, my mom said, pushing a glass of orange juice across the table toward me like it was meant to soften the blow. Your father and I have been talking, and we think it would be really healthy for you to spend some time with Grandpa Harold and Grandma Evelyn. I blinked and tried to process that. Like, for a weekend? My dad cleared his throat. That specific throat clear he uses when he knows he's about to say something awful, but wants it to sound reasonable. More like, for the foreseeable future. Foreseeable future, I repeated slowly, rolling the words around like they might change shape. So you mean I'm moving? To the farm? Just for a bit, Mom said cheerfully, using that forced optimism she gets when she's trying harder to convince herself than anyone else. It'll be an experience. An experience, sure, because getting banished to the middle of nowhere at 15 is totally the same thing as a cool life adventure. Why? I asked. Nobody answered. The silence got thick, the kind where you hear the fridge buzzing and your own heart pounding in your ears. Finally, my dad spoke. Nolan needs more room. I stared at him. Nolan needs room. He's at an important stage academically, Mom added, sounding like she was quoting a parenting guide written by someone who's never raised an actual kid. He's signing up for honors courses, joining the debate club, and honestly, the house just feels cramped. Cramped. We lived in a 4-bedroom house with 3 kids, so I wasn't buying that math. So I'm the one being sent away, I said, keeping my voice flat. So Nolan can have a quieter place to do what? Exactly study? Don't exaggerate, Dad snapped. Right? Exaggerating. The classic word parents use when they don't want to admit how ridiculous they sound. You've always been more self-sufficient, Mom continued, reaching over and patting my hand like I was about to be dropped off at a shelter. And your grandfather could use some help on the farm anyway. So really, everyone wins. Everyone wins, she said, while I was being quietly removed from my own life. What about school? I asked. There's a high school not too far from the farm, Dad said. You'll adjust. And my friends? You'll meet new people. What about Ethan? My dad cut in sharply, that final tone that means the discussion is over and any pushback is unacceptable. This isn't up for debate. Your grandparents already know. You'll be there next week. And just like that, it was done. No vote. No real conversation. Just a decision made by 2 people who were supposed to protect me, but clearly cared more about Nolan's academic future. I went upstairs and started packing, and my bedroom, the one I'd had since I was 7, suddenly felt temporary, like I was checking out of a place that no longer belonged to me. The posters on the walls didn't matter. The bed wasn't mine anymore, and my clothes got shoved into 2 suitcases because apparently I was starting my new life traveling light as farm kid Ethan. Nolan walked by my room, noticed the bags, and stopped. So you're actually leaving? He asked. I didn't look up, just kept folding. Looks like it. Man, that's rough. I laughed before I could stop myself, a short, bitter sound. Is it, Nolan? Is it really? He shifted awkwardly. I didn't ask them to do this. No, I said, but you didn't stop them either. He opened his mouth, thought better of it, mumbled something about homework, and disappeared into his newly quiet, distraction-free kingdom. Later that night, I came downstairs for a glass of water and froze when I heard my name floating in from the living room. Do you think we're making the right call? Mom asked softly. He'll be okay, Dad replied. Harold will straighten him out, and Nolan genuinely needs the space. His teachers say he could go Ivy League. I still feel guilty. Don't. Ethan's always been tough. He doesn't rely on us like Nolan does. Standing there in the dark with an empty glass in my hand, I realized they actually believed that being the easy kid meant I needed less love, less protection, less effort. Because I didn't complain, didn't demand tutors, didn't throw fits over not getting the newest console, I was expendable. I went back upstairs, lay in bed, and stared at the ceiling until morning. A week later, my dad drove me 4 hours into the heart of farm country, the kind of place where gas stations sell live worms and coffee, and Starbucks might as well be a legend, before pulling into Grandpa Harold's gravel driveway. The house was old with peeling white paint and a wraparound porch that looked like it had survived decades of hard weather and bad years. Endless fields stretched out behind it, maybe corn, I honestly couldn't tell, since my farming experience peaked at keeping a houseplant alive. Grandpa Harold stood on the porch with his arms folded, wearing faded overalls that looked like they'd been around longer than I had, tall and lean with that permanently weathered look of someone who's worked outside his whole life. Grandma Evelyn stood next to him, drying her hands on a flowered apron, softer around the edges but just as imposing. My dad barely stepped out of the car. "Hi, Harold." "Evelyn." He shook their hands quickly, then turned to me. "Behave yourself, Ethan. Do what they tell you. We'll call." He hugged me, stiff and rushed, then got back in the car and drove off without another word. No promises, no reassurance, just gone. I stood there holding my 2 suitcases, watching the dust settle where his car disappeared, feeling something inside my chest give way. "Well," Grandpa Harold said in a rough, no-nonsense voice, "you planning on standing there all day or coming inside?" I picked up my bags and followed them in, and the house smelled like coffee, old wood, and something warm baking in the kitchen. The house itself was small and tidy but clearly lived in, the kind of place where nothing existed just to look nice and everything had a job to do. Grandma Evelyn led me down the hall and showed me my room, which was barely bigger than a closet, with a twin bed, a scratched wooden dresser, and one window overlooking the fields that seemed to go on forever. There were no posters, no decorations, no personal touches at all, just empty space. "Bathroom's down the hall," she said calmly. "Dinner's at 6. Breakfast is at 5:30. I stared at her. 5:30 in the morning? "The farm doesn't run itself," Grandpa Harold said from the doorway. "You'll be up with me every day, feeding the chickens, checking the cows, fixing whatever decided to break overnight." "Every day," I repeated, just to be sure I heard him right. "Every single day?" He wasn't smiling, and it was clear this wasn't meant as a joke. "Welcome to the farm, kid." That night, I unpacked my suitcases and sat on the edge of the bed scrolling through my phone, hoping for something, anything. There were no messages from my parents. Nolan had sent exactly one text. "Good luck, man." That was it. I opened Instagram and scrolled through his page, seeing him grinning with his debate team, holding some award, posing in his freshly rearranged bedroom with better lighting and a caption that read, "New setup. New focus. Big things ahead." I shut my phone off and laid back in the dark. The house was silent in a way I wasn't used to. No TV murmuring downstairs, no dishwasher humming, nothing but crickets outside and the sound of my own breathing. That's when it really sank in. I wasn't visiting, and I wasn't on some extended break. I'd been left behind. At 15, I'd been swapped out for my brother's potential. I didn't cry, even though I felt like I might. And instead I stared at the ceiling and made myself a promise that if they didn't need me anymore, I'd build a life where I didn't need them either. The alarm went off at 4:50 in the morning. Not a soft buzz, but an ear-splitting rooster scream that sounded like it was happening inches from my head. I shot upright, confused for a second, then remembered exactly where I was. The farm, the exile, my new reality as the kid nobody wanted. I dragged myself into jeans and a hoodie and shuffled into the kitchen, where Grandpa Harold was already dressed and drinking black coffee from a mug that said, "I'm not retired. I'm a professional grandpa." He looked me over and raised an eyebrow. "You always dress like you're headed to a funeral?" "It's 5 in the morning," I muttered. "It's Tuesday," he replied. "Let's go." I followed him outside into the cold, dark morning, where the sky was that strange gray color before sunrise, and the air smelled like damp dirt and something sharp I'd later recognize as pure farm. "Chickens first," he said, handing me a bucket of feed. "Scatter it around the coop and let them handle the rest." I looked into the bucket. "That's it. You want an instruction manual? Fair enough." I walked toward the chicken coop, a fenced area full of suspicious, judgmental birds staring at me like I'd personally wronged them. I tossed the feed around like I was feeding pigeons in a city park. "Not like that," Grandpa Harold called. "Spread it evenly, or the big ones eat everything and the small ones go hungry." "They're chickens," I said. "Does it really matter?" He shot me a look so sharp it could have spoiled milk. "Everything matters." I adjusted, spreading the feed more carefully, and the chickens rushed in like tiny feathered monsters. Good, he said. Now grab the eggs. From where? He pointed to the nesting boxes. I opened the first one and found a chicken inside glaring at me. There's a chicken in here. Then move it. Move it. You want eggs or not? I reached in slowly like I was diffusing a bomb, and the chicken pecked my hand. Ow. Grandpa Harold laughed, actually laughed. She's just saying good morning. She's attacking me. You'll survive. I managed to collect 6 eggs and got pecked a few more times, and by the end my hands were numb and I had developed a deep, personal hatred for poultry. Still, Grandpa Harold nodded. Not bad for your first day. It wasn't exactly praise, but it wasn't criticism either, and somehow that meant something. Over the next few weeks, I fell into the rhythm of farm life. Wake up at 5, feed chickens, collect eggs, check water troughs. Breakfast at 6:30, usually eggs, which felt ironic, with toast and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The school bus at 7:30 for an hour-long ride into town. Back home by 3:30. Homework in the truck while Grandpa checked fence lines. Evening chores at 5. Feeding cows, hauling hay, fixing whatever broke. Dinner at 8, then collapse. It was exhausting, but it was honest work, and on a farm there was no pretending. Things were either done or they weren't. Animals were either fed or hungry, and nobody cared how you felt about it. Strangely, that was easier than my parents pretending to care while quietly pushing me out. About a month in, I was sitting on the porch one night doing math homework under the porch light when Grandma Evelyn came out carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. Thought you might want this, she said, handing me one. Thanks. She sat beside me and rocked gently in the old chair. You settling in all right? I shrugged. I guess. Your parents been calling much? Once, maybe twice. Not lately. She made a quiet sound but didn't say anything, and after a minute I asked, did they tell you why they sent me here? She looked at me closely. They said Nolan needed space. And you believe that? She smiled sadly. No, sweetheart, I didn't. My throat tightened. Then why didn't you stop it? Because sometimes, she said softly, people make bad choices, and the only thing you can do is choose better for yourself. I stared down at the steam rising from my mug. I don't know how. You already are, she replied. You showed up, you worked, and you didn't quit. That's more than most folks manage. I didn't have a response, so I just sat there on that porch in the middle of nowhere, sipping hot chocolate and feeling a little less invisible. By the 3rd month, I'd stopped checking my phone for messages from my parents altogether. They called once a month, always following the same script. How's school? Fine. Making friends? Sure. Good. Good. Nolan made honor roll again. We're so proud. That's nice. Okay. Love you. Talk soon. Be good, my dad always said. And then the call would end with no we miss you. No when are you coming home? Just a rundown of Nolan's latest accomplishments delivered in the same tone you'd use to read quarterly earnings. Nolan's Instagram, meanwhile, was doing great. He got a brand new car at 17, bright red with a bow on top. Caption Mom and Dad came through, feeling blessed. While that was happening, I was out on the farm teaching myself how to replace a carburetor on a 1987 tractor using a shaky YouTube video and a whole lot of anger as motivation. On my 17th birthday, a card showed up in the mail that said, "Happy birthday, Ethan. We're so proud of the young man you're becoming. Love, Mom and Dad." No call, no present, just a printed message that felt like it came straight off an assembly line. Grandpa Harold handed me a new pair of work gloves that same day and said, "Yours are about done." And that was it. No wrapping, no card, but somehow it meant more than anything my parents had sent in the last 2 years. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and had a realization that caught me off guard. I wasn't waiting to go home anymore, because the farm, the work, the quiet, all of it was starting to feel more like home than any place I'd lived before, and that scared me. It scared me because it meant letting go of the idea that my parents might someday wake up, realize they'd screwed up, and come get me, finally seeing that I mattered. Deep down, though, I already knew better. I didn't matter to them. Nolan did. And I was just the kid they moved out of the way so their golden boy could shine. Somewhere around when I turned 16, I stopped thinking of the farm as a punishment and started thinking of it as mine, not on paper, but in the way that actually counts, the kind of ownership you earn by pouring yourself into something until it becomes part of you. I knew every fence post that leaned, every gate that stuck, and every cow by name. And yes, I named them all, starting with Bessie, obviously, then Karen, who had strong opinions, Steve for reasons I won't explain, and one especially angry heifer I called the IRS because she showed up uninvited and made everyone miserable. Grandpa Harold noticed the change one morning while we were hauling feed bags off the truck and said, "You're moving different." And when I asked what he meant, he said I didn't drag my feet anymore and walked like I actually had somewhere to be. I shrugged and told him chores weren't going to do themselves, and he gave me the smallest smile and said no, they wouldn't. That was the point where things shifted, because until then I'd just been following instructions, doing tasks, fixing what broke, feeding what needed feeding, working hard but still just following someone else's script. Then one night, over dinner, Grandpa Harold surprised me by saying that on Saturdays we sold eggs and produce at the farmer's market, and he was too old to handle it alone now, so I'd be running it. I blinked and asked if he meant by myself, and when he asked if I had a problem with that, I said no, and he told me to be ready by 6 in the morning while Grandma Evelyn smiled quietly into her mashed potatoes. That Saturday, I loaded the truck with crates of eggs, bags of potatoes, jars of Grandma's strawberry jam, and a hand-painted sign that read Sunrise Valley Farm in letters that looked like they'd survived a few wars. The farmer's market took over the town square, rows of pop-up tents and folding tables selling everything from honey to homemade soap shaped like butts, which I learned was just something rural America accepts without question. I set up between a guy selling firewood and a woman selling crocheted toilet paper covers, and she smiled at me and asked if it was my first time, told me I'd do fine as long as I smiled and didn't sell myself short. By 8, people started showing up, mostly older folks with reusable bags asking if the eggs were free-range and whether we used pesticides, and when I didn't know something I said so, which seemed to earn me more trust than guessing. By 10 I'd sold half the eggs, and by noon I was completely sold out. And on the drive home, I counted the cash twice because I didn't believe it, $340 in one morning, when Grandpa Harold had told me a good day was maybe $150. When I handed him the money, he counted it, raised an eyebrow, and asked if I stole it, then laughed and told me I'd done good, which might as well have been a standing ovation. Grandma Evelyn came out and asked how it went, and when I said I sold out, she smiled like she'd known all along. That night at dinner, I finally asked why people paid $6 for eggs when the grocery store sold them for $2, and Grandpa Harold thought about it for a while before saying it was because people knew where the eggs came from and trusted them, and trust was worth more than cheap. That stuck with me, and the next week I did something without asking permission and made a new hand-painted sign that said organic eggs, 7 a dozen, and when Grandpa Harold questioned it, I pointed out we didn't use chemicals or pesticides, and the chickens ate bugs and grass, which made it honest even if it wasn't certified. He stared at me for a long second, shrugged, and said it was my funeral, but I sold out again by 10 and made $420, and this time people didn't just buy eggs, they asked about the farm, about the chickens, and one woman even asked if she could visit sometime. When I brought it up at home and asked if we could do tours, Grandpa Harold looked at Grandma Evelyn, and she smiled and said she didn't see why not. So we started small, a few families at first, kids who'd never seen a real chicken and parents who wanted to show them where food came from, and I charged $10 a person and gave them the tour myself. I let them gather eggs themselves and pet the calves, then sent them home with a dozen eggs and a jar of jam, which didn't seem like much on its own, but started to add up faster than I expected. Within 3 months, we were pulling in an extra $800 a month, and Grandpa Harold started calling me the business guy, a title I liked enough that I quietly started using it for myself too. Around then, 17 years old and halfway through junior year, I noticed something else happening from a distance. Nolan's Instagram presence was fading. He posted less, the captions got shorter, and the shine was gone, replaced by pictures of him hunched over a desk with the caption "Finals week hits different," or sitting in his car staring into the camera with hollow eyes saying senioritis is real. The trophies and parties vanished, and all that was left was a kid who looked worn out. I didn't exactly feel sorry for him, maybe just a little, but mostly I felt detached, like we were starring in 2 completely different movies, his winding down while mine was finally picking up speed. My parents called in December, and my mom's voice was cheerful in that fake, overly bright way she had perfected. "Hi, sweetheart, how are you doing?" "Fine. School going okay?" "Yeah, that's wonderful," she said, then jumped straight to the point. Nolan got early acceptance into State University. I waited, half expecting her to ask about me, but she didn't. That's great, I said without much emotion. We're so proud of him, she continued. He's going to major in business. Can you believe it? Business, I thought, almost laughing. That's wonderful, Mom. She told me they were having a small celebration dinner that weekend, just family, and said I was welcome to come if I wanted, not that they missed me or hoped I'd be there, just if I wanted. I told her I was busy, and she said maybe next time, and that was that. After I hung up, I stared at my phone for a minute, then opened my notes app and started jotting down ideas like delivery service, subscription boxes, and online orders, because if Nolan was going to study business, I was already living it. By the time I turned 18, the farm wasn't just getting by anymore, it was doing well. We expanded the egg operation, brought in more chickens, and started growing organic vegetables in a small greenhouse Grandpa Harold and I built using salvaged materials and pure stubbornness. I set up an Instagram account for Sunrise Valley Farm and posted photos of the chickens, the sunrise, the produce, and behind-the-scenes moments, and people actually cared, enough that we hit 800 followers in 2 months. Then I added online orders using a simple Google form where people could sign up for weekly produce boxes, $25 for small, $45 for large, eggs, seasonal vegetables, and a jar of Grandma Evelyn's jam included. I delivered them myself every Saturday after the farmer's market, starting with 5 customers and growing to 23 by the 3rd month. I bought a used white van for $3,000, dented and ugly but reliable, and slapped a magnetic sign on the side that read Sunrise Valley Farm, fresh and local. Grandpa Harold stood in the driveway staring at it with his hands on his hips and asked if I was serious about all this, and when I said yes, he nodded and told me not to half do it, reminded me to change the oil, and smiled when I told him I had it covered, clapping me on the shoulder like he knew exactly what I was doing. During my senior year, I barely thought about my parents at all. Nolan graduated high school with a huge party, balloons, photos, and a cake that probably cost more than my van. I graduated too, top 15% of my class, not a standout but solid, and I called my parents to ask if they could come. There was a pause. Then my mom explained that Nolan's graduation was the same weekend at the university, and it was a big deal, and when I said mine was too, she sighed and said they'd make it up to me later. They didn't. On graduation day, I walked across the stage in a rented cap and gown that smelled like dust and disappointment, and Grandpa Harold and Grandma Evelyn were in the front row cheering louder than anyone else, Grandpa standing up and clapping like I'd just won something major while Grandma cried. For a brief moment, I didn't even notice my parents weren't there because the people who actually raised me were. Afterward, we went to a diner. Grandpa ordered pie, Grandma got coffee, and I ate a burger. And halfway through the meal, Grandpa slid an envelope across the table and told me to open it. Inside was a $5,000 check, and when I tried to refuse, he shut that down fast and said they'd been saving it for me and that I'd earned it. Grandma nodded in agreement, and I didn't have anything clever to say, so I just said thank you. Grandpa raised his coffee cup and toasted the kid who showed up and didn't quit, and for the first time in years I truly felt seen. That summer I enrolled in community college in an agricultural business program, not Harvard or State University, but mine, and with that $5,000 I had a plan to turn Sunrise Valley Farm into something bigger, something my parents couldn't overlook, and something Nolan's business degree couldn't touch, because while he was learning theory in a classroom, I was building something real with dirt under my nails and sunlight on my back. Community college wasn't impressive to look at, the campus resembling an office park that accidentally became a school with dull buildings, sad landscaping, and a parking lot that flooded if it rained too hard. But I didn't care, because while Nolan was posting dorm room selfies with captions about college life, I was sitting in Agricultural Business 101 learning how to actually run a profitable operation. Nobody talks about how honest community college is, how no one's pretending or chasing some fantasy version of themselves. They're there to learn, work, and survive, and it was the most real education I'd ever had. My professor, Dr. Caldwell, a woman in her 60s who looked like she'd fought tractors and won, read through my business plan, looked up at me, and said, "This is good." Then she said something that stopped me cold. "You're thinking way too small." I blinked at her. "Too small? You're doing farmers markets and deliveries," she said, "and that's fine for now, but if you actually want to grow this thing, You need partnerships, restaurants, grocery stores, maybe even institutions. I laughed nervously and told her I was 19 and asked who was going to take me seriously. She looked at me over her glasses and said the person who sees a product they need at a price they can afford, because age doesn't matter and results do. So I started cold calling restaurants, the awkward, sweaty-palmed kind where I tripped over my own words and sounded like I was about to apologize for existing. Hi, my name's Ethan. I run Sunrise Valley Farm. We do organic produce and free-range eggs, and I was wondering if, click. Most hung up, some were polite but uninterested, and one guy laughed and told me they already had suppliers. But then I called a small bistro in town called the Harvest Table, and the owner, a woman named Marissa, actually listened. Organic, she asked. Yes, ma'am, I said. No pesticides, no chemicals, eggs from chickens that actually see daylight. She paused and asked how much, and I gave her a number just under what she was paying now, but still enough to make it worth my time. Send me samples, she said. I did, and a week later she called back and said my eggs were incredible and she wanted 10 dozen a week, which almost made me drop my phone. 10 dozen, I repeated, and when she asked if that was a problem, I told her no, even though my brain was already doing frantic math. 120 eggs a week, every week, meant we had to expand fast, build another coop, buy more chickens, so that night I sat down with Grandpa Harold and laid everything out. I told him I needed about $2,000 for materials and another $500 for birds, and he sat there thinking for a long time before getting up, opening a kitchen drawer, and pulling out a small metal box full of cash. That's farm money, he said, profits from the last couple years, meant for a new roof, but the roof can wait. I tried to say I couldn't take it, but he cut me off and said I could and I would, because it wasn't charity, it was an investment, and I'd pay him back if I made it work. I looked at Grandma Evelyn. She nodded, and we shook on it. 2 weeks later, I had a second coop, 50 new chickens, and a contract with the Harvest Table paying $180 a week, which wasn't life-changing money, but it was steady, and steady meant I could plan. Within 6 months, I added 3 more restaurant clients, a cafe, a brunch place, and a farm-to-table joint that charged $18 for avocado toast, and called it artisanal, which I didn't care about because they paid on time. By the time I turned 20, Sunrise Valley Farm was pulling in about $4,000 a month in revenue. Not profit, but still real money, and I was paying Grandpa Harold back $300 a month while reinvesting the rest into equipment and growth. I hired 2 part-time helpers from town, Luis, who knew more about soil than I ever would, and Jen, who could fix just about anything with duct tape and pure determination, and together we became a small, scrappy, very real team. Then one Saturday morning at the farmer's market, I met Lily. She was standing at my table looking at the eggs when one of the chickens in my display crate, yes, I brought a live chicken for ambience because I'm apparently that guy, started making a strange noise, and Lily snapped her head up and asked if the chicken was okay. I stared at her, confused, and she said the chicken was wheezing and showing signs of respiratory distress, which made me do a double take and ask how she knew that. She told me she was a vet tech, crouched down to inspect the chicken, and suggested I get her checked for a possible infection. She introduced herself as Lily, complimented my eggs, and laughed when I awkwardly complimented her vet knowledge, and I swear that laugh was the best sound I'd heard in years. We talked for a long time, not just about chickens, though there was an oddly attractive 10-minute deep dive into poultry health, and she told me she worked at a clinic outside town, loved animals, and grew up on a ranch in Wyoming, which made me say she understood the farm life, and her reply of most people don't hit me harder than I expected. I invited her out to see the farm, half joking about whether inviting girls to see chickens counted as a move, and she grinned and said she'd come by, which she did the following Tuesday in an old truck, jeans, boots, and a flannel that made her look like she belonged there. I showed her everything, the coops, the greenhouse, the fields, even introduced her to the IRS, the angry cow, who immediately liked Lily more than she'd ever liked me. And as the sun went down, Lily told me I'd built something real and corrected me when I tried to downplay it, saying this wasn't just a farm, it was a solid business. The way she looked at me when she said that made something click, because for the first time I felt seen as just me, not the kid who got sent away and not Nolan's brother, and we started dating a week later. It was easy and comfortable, like we'd known each other forever, with her helping out after work and us sitting on the porch talking until the stars came out, Grandma Evelyn loving her immediately, and Grandpa Harold warning me not to screw it up in the most romantic way possible. Around then, when I was 21, something shifted with Nolan, because he posted a photo of himself sitting in his childhood bedroom, looking worn out with a caption that just said taking a semester off, need to regroup, and nothing else. I texted him for the first time in months asking if he was okay, and 3 days later he replied that he was just burned out and college wasn't what he thought it would be, and I didn't really know what to say to that, so I just told him that sucked. Hope it gets better, I texted back, and that was the end of it because he never replied. About a week later, my mom called, the first time she'd dialed my number in almost a year, and I could hear the tension in her voice as she tried to sound normal. "Hi, Ethan, how are you doing?" I hesitated and said I was good, and she rushed ahead like she'd been waiting for permission. "That's great. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something, and I knew immediately where this was going." She explained that Nolan was having a rough time, that he was back home for a while, and that tuition and expenses were piling up, and then she paused before asking if maybe I could help out a little since I had my farm thing going. Farm thing. I closed my eyes and asked how much, and when she said maybe $5,000 just to get through the semester, promising they'd pay me back, it hit me like a punch. $5,000 was the exact amount Grandpa Harold had given me, the money I'd turned into a real business, and I told her I couldn't do it. There was a long silence before she asked what I meant by can't, and I explained that everything I made went right back into the farm and I didn't have cash sitting around. She pushed, saying I was doing well and they'd seen my Instagram. Of course they had, and I told her doing okay didn't mean I had money to give away. Then she pulled the family card, saying this was my brother, and I reminded her that they were my parents who sent me away at 15 so he could have space. The silence after that was heavier, and when she said that wasn't fair, I asked if it wasn't, and eventually she sighed, said they'd figure something out, and hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling guilty and angry and hollow all at once, and Lily found me on the porch later and asked if I was okay. I told her my mom had asked me for money, and when she asked what I said and I told her no, she nodded and said good, which surprised me until she pointed out they never invested in me, so why should I bankroll them? I argued weakly that they were family, and she said family shows up, and they didn't, and I hated how right she was even though it still hurt. That night, I decided I was done waiting for my parents to finally notice me, and that I was going to build something so solid and obvious they couldn't ignore it even if they wanted to, and 6 months later I pulled it off. I landed a contract with a regional grocery chain covering 3 stores with weekly deliveries of eggs, produce, and specialty items, worth $40,000 a year, and I reread the email 3 times before calling Grandpa Harold and telling him we'd done it, which made him laugh harder than I'd ever heard. That year's Sunrise Valley Farm brought in $120,000 in revenue, and after expenses and payroll, I cleared $35,000 in profit, paid Grandpa Harold back every dollar he'd loaned me despite his protests, and told him it was his because he'd earned it, only for him to look at me and say quietly that I was the one who had. That Christmas, my parents sent a generic card with no mention of the farm or anything I'd accomplished, just Merry Christmas and love, Mom and Dad, and I tossed it straight into the recycling because I didn't need their approval anymore. I had proof. I was 25 when they showed up without warning, Lily and I working in the greenhouse transplanting tomato seedlings when a familiar SUV pulled into the driveway, and we exchanged a look because I definitely hadn't invited them. When we walked outside, my parents stood there staring around like they'd wandered onto a movie set, because the farm had changed completely since I was 15, with 3 greenhouses, a renovated barn, new fencing, solar panels, and a proper sign at the entrance that read Sunrise Valley Farm, EST 1987. My mom spotted me first and hurried over with her arms open, calling my name, then stopped awkwardly when I didn't move, settling for telling me how healthy I looked, while my dad hung back with his hands in his pockets and said, "Hi, son." Lily squeezed my hand and slipped away, which was the smartest move anyone made that day, and my mom explained they'd been hearing about how well the farm was doing, mostly from Nolan seeing things online, and that they thought they should come see it for themselves. I pointed out it had been close to 10 years, which made her flinch, and my dad switched to impressed mode, telling me the place looked incredible and asking how much I was pulling in annually, which told me everything I needed to know. When they said they were proud of me, I asked where that pride was when I graduated high school or started the business or any time in the last decade. And when they said they'd made mistakes but were here now, I asked why they were really here. They exchanged a look, and I said Nolan's name before they could, and my mom admitted he was struggling, buried under loans, unable to find work, living with them for 2 years, which led to my dad saying they weren't asking for charity, but for help, because family helps family, a line that actually made me laugh. When they finally said $30,000, like it was a reasonable ask, more than I'd even made in profit the year before, I told them no, flat out. And when my dad hardened and reminded me Nolan was my brother, I reminded them they were my parents who disappeared for 10 years and only showed up now because they needed something. My mom cried and said they loved me, and I told her she loved what I'd built, not me, then turned and walked back toward the greenhouse, stopping only long enough to hear my dad say they were trying, to which I replied without turning around that they were 10 years too late, and then I kept walking. They drove off about 20 minutes later without saying goodbye, just pulled out of the driveway and disappeared, and I stayed sitting on the porch staring at absolutely nothing until Lily came out and asked if I was okay. I told her I was, even though we both knew that wasn't really the point, and she sat down next to me and said quietly that what just happened had been hard, but also necessary, and I appreciated that she didn't try to fix it or soften it. After a few minutes of silence, she smiled and said, "Speaking of family, how would you feel about starting one?" And my brain completely stalled out. I asked if she was proposing, and she laughed and said no. That part was on me. And I laughed too, real laughter, and said okay. Yeah, I was absolutely doing that. 2 months later, I did. Nothing flashy, just the two of us on the farm at sunset in the same spot where she'd stood the first time she visited. And I didn't have a rehearsed speech or anything fancy, just told her I loved her, wanted to build a life with her, and asked if she'd marry me. And she said yes before I even finished asking. We planned the wedding for the following spring, small and intimate. About 80 people, her family, our friends, Grandpa Harold and Grandma Evelyn. The people who had actually shown up for us, and I didn't invite my parents. Lily asked once, gently, if I was sure, and I told her yes, with no regrets, and I meant it. A week before the wedding my mom called, and even though I almost ignored it, I answered, and she told me she'd heard I was getting married and said how happy they were for me, and then asked the real question, whether they were invited. I told her no, and when she went quiet and said they were my parents, I told her they hadn't been there for my life and didn't get to suddenly be there for my wedding, that it wasn't cruelty, it was honesty, and when she begged me not to do this, I told her I wasn't doing anything anymore except refusing to pretend. I hung up, blocked the number, shut my phone off, and that chapter ended. The wedding itself was perfect, the weather held, the flowers were beautiful, and Lily looked unreal, like she'd stepped straight out of a dream, and Grandpa Harold walked her down the aisle since her dad had passed years earlier, crying openly the whole time. When she reached me, she whispered if I was ready, and I told her I'd never been more ready in my life, and we said our vows under an arch made from reclaimed barn wood and wildflowers, hers making me cry and mine making her laugh. And when we kissed, the place erupted with cheers from 80 people who genuinely loved us. No empty chairs, no forced invites, just warmth and support. During the reception, Grandpa Harold gave a toast and said he'd met me when I was 15, angry and hurt and lost, and watched me become the man standing there not because of my parents but in spite of them, raising his glass and wishing us a foundation stronger than the one I'd been given. And when I hugged him afterward, he whispered he was proud of me, and I told him I knew. Later that night, after the music faded and the lights glowed softly across the porch, Lily and I stood together under the stars, and she asked if I thought my parents would ever forgive me, and I said maybe, but I didn't need them to, and she smiled and kissed me. And in that moment it really hit me that I'd spent years waiting to be seen by people who never looked my way, and I didn't need that anymore. I'd built a life, a farm, and a family without them, and that was enough. The Monday after the wedding, I posted a single photo on Instagram of Lily and me standing in front of the barn smiling, with a caption that said, "Built a life, built a family, built it all without the people who said I couldn't. Grateful for the ones who stayed." And it got thousands of likes. But the part that mattered was that Nolan commented 3 words, "Happy for you." And for the first time in a decade I believed him, not because he'd changed, but because I had. I didn't need revenge, apologies, or validation anymore, because I'd already won by creating a life that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. A week later, a letter showed up from my mom, and I almost threw it away, but Lily suggested I read it once and then decide. So I did, and it was long and messy and full of apologies and regret, ending with her saying she couldn't change the past but hoped one day I'd let her be part of my future. I folded it up, put it in a drawer, and didn't respond. Maybe someday I would, but not then, because that day I had a farm to run, a wife who loved me, and a life that was entirely, beautifully mine.